welcome to another episode of the Long Game Podcast, where industry veterans share insights and stories and experiences from the front lines of private equity in Asia, drawing on our experience of I guess, a combined experience of pushing 50 years now. And I'm joined, as always, by my partner in crime, Carlos Aquino. Carlos, how are you?
Very well, Nino. Thank you. How are you?
Very good. I apologize, by the way, for my background. I'm kind of off-site today, but I am indeed in lovely Hawaii. But today we're joined by a special guest, kind of a first for the podcast. We're joined by an old colleague and friend of mine, Masahiro Shimizu, who joins us from Tokyo. Shimizu-san made kind of quite a name for himself amongst EQT and sort of the portfolio companies that we were working on as kind of the CFO whisperer, kind of our guru, all things CFO. And so that's generally kind of the topic for today. And we couldn't be more pleased to be able to invite Shimizu-san on to share his insights. Shimizu-san, maybe I'll turn it over to you. You can do a brief intro bio.
Oh, thank you, Nino. My name is again Masahiro Shimizu. I live in Tokyo, Japan, and I run a small company by the name of CFO Room, where we provide financial advisory services and CFO coaching. Based upon my fairly maybe rare experiences that I did CFO at 3 PE-backed companies, and I really enjoyed that experience because at PE-backed companies, we can purely focus on capital allocation and value creation. And I also serve as as Nino mentioned, advisor to EQT, and where we met and have worked together. We had a good time with you, Nino. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah. So as I mentioned, today's focus really is the CFO and how to unlock, the optimal sort of impact from the CFO position in PE investments. And we've spent a fair amount of time over the last few episodes really zeroing in on talent. We did an episode on talent overall, executive talent overall, and building a bench. We did a deep dive into the CEO. But the CFO is another one of these key kind of pivot roles that really is essential to get right, to deliver good outcomes on a PE investment. So we want to focus on that and really drawing from our experience more as, functional outsiders, but I guess consumers of CFOs, but joined by Shimizu-san, who, as he mentioned, was a successful private equity CFO in several investments. Anybody can be successful once, but Shimizu-san was successful in just sequential investments, and now, very established as an advisor. So looking forward to all your insights. So today, I think what we're going to do is really kind of go through in kind of three buckets, 3 big topics. And the first is really kind of the core role of the CFO, how the CFO adds value and how to think about the role of the CFO in the context of a PE investment. But then we're going to kind of branch out and talk about the role that the CFO can play impacting the organization beyond just kind of finance. And then finally, I think we'll sort of close by talking about best practice, advice, tips for what GP practitioners can do to, find the best CFOs, motivate them, interact with them, and just set them up for success. So a lot of ground to cover, but let's start with that core bullseye in the target, the core role of the CFO, and specifically, against the context of a PE investment. How do you think about how a CFO adds value in PE investments?
Okay, so the most important task that the CFO needs to start is to agree upon with the management team, agree upon the core competency and strength of the business, of the company. If the management team is not aligned with the definition of our core strengths, we should start from there. Because in other episodes that Nino and Carlos had, you discussed the importance of time. And this is, to me, it's like very, similar to human beings. It takes time to adjust and correct our weaknesses, but it takes less time to improve our strength. So within the limited time of the PE hold, we should invest in and build on the strength of the company. We should know who we are, and we should reinvest in ourselves. If that is not well defined, I think the time may be lost very quickly. So I would start with that as CFO.
It's very interesting starting point, because what you're saying is that the fundamental strategy and behind that, the underwriting approach that the PE fund or the GP would take has to be aligned with and shaped by the CFO. So it really goes to first principles, even before we think about a finance function and a reporting and all of the day-to-day and longer activities. You're saying that strategy and competitive capability is really the starting point and essential.
Yes. Again, the business is made of people, and we ourselves take time to correct our weakness. And my wife tells me, correct this and correct that, and it takes time, and maybe I can't correct forever. So it's really important to build on the strength rather than focusing on the weakness. And that should be the strategy to me.
That's a profound insight, actually. I hadn't actually quite thought of it in those terms, but it makes a ton of sense when you say it like that. I mean, I think as operators, I'll speak for myself. I mean, I think part of the instinctual behavior is to seek out problems and work on fixing them, as opposed to really kind of doubling down on strengths. But the way you put it in terms of the context of making the best use of time, that's really compelling. Tell us a little bit about how you interacted with the CEO in achieving that kind of alignment, because that kind of core leadership function is something that certainly the CEO and I suppose the deal team at some level needs to be involved with as well.
Of course, if a CEO and the rest of the management team members are on the same page already, CFO doesn't need to play additional role in alignment. But if a CFO believes that they are talking too many initiatives and placing an equal amount of time and capital and resources on each initiative, maybe we should lead a discussion to refocus on our core competency first and rebuild the existing business first, and then add additional new pillars so that the next owner would find our business a more interesting combination of the existing business and new initiatives. So it's a capital allocation policy discussion we are having right now, but CEO tends to add more business lines and grow so that revenue will grow and profit will grow. But I think CFO needs to be mindful that what kind of prior investment would need to support the future P&L.
Shimizu, I want you to comment on the following. When I think about the core functions of a CFO, I think about three things that just are recurring. And maybe at the most basic level, I think about that GPs, PE funds, are very concerned about visibility. And as for the larger PE funds, they have ever growing portfolio companies. And, every day, cash is flowing in and out of the business, and risks are being assumed, and lots of things going on. And the GP is concerned about visibility from their own benefit. They're certainly concerned about also relaying and providing visibility to their LPs about the business. So let's call it visibility is one. A second is, and it's related, is risk management. Because again, the more complex the business, the more transaction intensive it is. There has to be a set of controls in place to ensure that risks are identified and mitigated. And finally, capital allocation, or CapEx, allocation and return on investment. So PE funds are all about return on their capital investment, and building an underwriting story about that at the beginning. And of course, then the business requires capital for maintenance and growth. So sort of husbanding and shepherding that capital and ensuring its returns optimized. So those for me have always been three cardinal principles. Maybe if you could comment or say which of them is even more important, one versus the other.
So I think to agree on the key performance indicators and the leading indicators with both GP and the management team is very, very important. And not only to report to GP, but also to understand the health of our own status. Forecast is very important. To avoid surprise is very important. GP is not happy to be surprised all the time. So we have to make sure, not 100 KPIs, but we have to make sure that we agree upon maybe 5 to 10 to 15 KPIs to be able to communicate the state of our operations and management to GP and within the board and within the management team members. Ideally, the KPI tracking and reporting should be on a regular basis and the automated way, so that we don't need to craft Excel sheet and everything. But it's a balance of investment and return from the reporting exercise. But at least we should agree upon the key indicators from the beginning. We also should have a discussion about investment and review. The cost of capital should be agreed upon very initially with the management, business lines, and GP. And we should hold a budget process based upon the cost of capital. And it shouldn't be a list of a long wish list and who should get what. Should be measured by the risk profile and the cost of capital and the return on investment. We shouldn't be afraid of making mistakes in assumptions. So at one company, we used to hold an investment committee followed by a semi-annual review committee. Both finance people and business people attend and reflect what kind of mistakes we've made, what kind of successful assumptions we've made. And we should avoid business people criticizing finance or finance people criticizing business based upon the belief that we are human beings and make mistakes, but we should always improve the assumptions and the investment decisions so that we can make better and more correct investment decisions in the future.
Yeah, one thing, just as a follow-up to that specific point, I mean, this approach to, constantly using cost of capital and sort of ROI type frameworks to evaluating business proposals and, setting operating plans and so on. I mean, I think it's fair to say that certainly many sort of medium sort of size businesses that tend to be owned by private equity funds tend not to have that kind of management capability like built in right at the outset. And so to your point about timeline, how do you build that capability in a time frame that makes sense from like a PE investment horizon?
So team members and employees are informed that GP's IRR target is 20% or 30%. And the next question they would have is, then internal cost of capital should be also 20%. And then no investments can be made. So can we also can we only do cost cutting? And that's a wrong answer. We need to allow investments to enjoy the dividend in the future. So what we've done in our own at previous companies is we simply use the public company WACC as opposed to private equity environment like 7% or 9% in Japan typically. So we apply the 7% hurdle rate to any investments. And then I think employees and team members were more relaxed and think about positively to invest first and return next. And you know, Japanese public companies are criticized by many activist funds that we don't think about cost of capital. And now that is widely reported. I think we have less problems to educate team members nowadays.
One thing we have not, I want to come back to a point I made earlier, but, when it comes to cost of capital and returns, let's not lose sight of the fact that very typically in controlled buyout situations, which is most often what we all get involved in, these are leveraged transactions. And of course, we're in a, cost of capital environment now, which is, not what it was 10 years ago around the world. And so, there's a financial burden to the business. But what I'm asking you to comment on, Shimizu-san, is dealings with banks and ensuring that, first of all, negotiating the terms for the loans if the CFO is involved in the very beginning with the GP, but certainly ensuring that banks have comfort and ensuring that their covenants are being met. There's no risks around that. And looking for opportunities to refinance transaction on a constant basis. I'm sure you've been involved in those type of discussions, and you see that as an important function of the CFO.
So once we agree upon the core competency and the cost of capital and our investment discipline, we should optimize the cost structure and communicate that to banks on a regular basis. So typically we try to lower the fixed costs and try to link the other cost items to revenue, like marketing cost, IT cost, R&D cost, HR cost, cost of goods sold, and trying to vary these costs in line with revenue so that we have a very disciplined way to invest in marketing, way to invest in IT, way to invest in people and technology. And as long as we have a lower break-even revenue, I think banks are very happy to rely upon our midterm plan based upon the current optimized cost structure. So the first thing I would do to communicate with banks is, hey, listen, after GP's investment, our cost structure has completely changed, and therefore we have better chances to repay the debt and to serve the interest payments. So cost structure and the cost optimization is very, very important task for CFO as well.
Excellent. And I wanted to come back on, I put it on the table, and maybe I've just been, too influenced by past experience But what I have in mind is risk management and building control regimes. So I think this does vary by industry. In general, what I've found is where you have a lot of sort of transaction intensive business models with a lot of cash flowing in and out, or a lot of touch points. But the public, you do have the importance of a risk control regime, and these are companies, unless they've been carved out as public to private, they very often will not have a very mature set of capabilities to manage risks, and that's very typical in family businesses. So I wonder if you could comment on situations where you come into a business that really had no good internal controls, either a function within finance or a function of the board, or between the two, or outsourced. So talk a little bit about how to leverage this capability, how important it is, and how to build it from the ground up.
Perhaps we should start with the working capital management. We should understand the cash conversion cycle. And in order to do that, we should have, of course, a normal, regular accounting system where you can see the age of the receivables and payables. I would start from there, and that system should be able to capture the inventory if inventory is necessary to generate the future revenue. If inventory is sitting there for a long time, we should try to monetize that. So working capital is the first key step to be able to serve the LBO loan and the long-term debt. So if outsourcing is necessary or some small investment in ERP system is necessary, working capital management is I believe, is a good start to understand the health of the business.
Yeah, I'm certainly a big fan of measuring cash conversion days, and of course they're going to vary by industry. But just to get kind of push you on this point about the overall risk control regime, and in particular how to address it. I've seen every model under the sun. I've seen outsourcing to big four firms playing this role. I've seen internal control functions within finance. I've seen boards taking this thing over. So if you could comment on whether you see this even within the orbit of the CFO, and if so, what's the best way to build an agenda, organize it, and deliver this capability?
So within the board, I think there is an audit chair. Typically in the PE-backed situations, and the audit chair would report to the board about these areas for investigation, and of course CEO and CFO would join to execute the investigations and internal audit. In the Japanese PE-backed situations, typically they used to be public companies. So they have already internal functions and the workflow in place. So in our situations, we would try to reactivate the situations. Of course, we don't have to comply with the public company disclosure requirements and control requirements, but we wanted to follow the same principle and discipline to make sure that we are missing something very, very important and wrong.
Thank you.
Yeah, I thought, just I wanted to go back to maybe kind of sort of from a functional foundation perspective of, kind of the role that finance plays. And you mentioned planning and, in terms of you mentioned medium-term plan. There's presumably an annual operating budget. You mentioned forecasts, maybe that's quarterly or something like that. Could you talk a little bit about what you see as best practice as kind of the leader of the finance organization and kind of driving those planning and reporting processes and how those kinds of cycles fit with each other, how you interact with the underwrite that the fund has. I wanted to dwell a little more on those topics.
Okay. When the management team gets together, from legacy company or newly joined from outside, they first want to know the business plan that GP must have underwritten within the investment committee and also with external banks. And when I was CFO, I did not want to learn the answer, because if the answer is different from what we want to do, then maybe we should rebuild our plan first. So we would ask GP to rework together to plan. And the plan is a midterm plan, and that should be as long as maybe 5 years, because that should be the longer end of the PE holding period. So as long as we are now in agreement with our core competency and strength, and also if we want to add more new business lines, by business line, we would plan a 5-year plan. And typically that is only P&L view that typically does not consider capital expenditure and prior investments before revenue creation. But we should at least agree upon the P&L view on the 5-year plan. And then the first year of the 5-year plan should be the base for the annual budget. And there we have this investment request. We have this optimized cost structure in place. We have this working capital management task force coming in, so that not only P&L, but also balance sheet and cash flow budget would be created for the first year of the 5-year plan. We typically have debate about too much capex or more investments than planned in the future. When we build the 5-year plan, that was the only P&L view. So the annual budgeting process may have more arguments and debate about where the money should be spent, but hopefully the board and the management team agree upon the annual budget. And then on a quarterly basis, business review will be held, and we will update the forecast and report to the board and GP. That's how we typically work around the planning.
And on planning, I've seen different models where you have, as you say, the first year of the underwriting essentially becomes the envelope around the annual operating plan for year one. And I think within the culture of GPs, the most important thing to do is to meet or exceed, the targets in that first year of underwriting.
Right.
For the deal team to maintain, credibility and et cetera. But wondering if you could comment on this idea of either rolling. So of course, you have an annual operating plan, and that gets, renewed on base tied to the fiscal year cycle of the business. If you could comment on, the ideas of rolling forward plans that could be longer term. So resetting that first year of, the next year in the planning cycle, with being the first year of a 2-year or 3-year or 5-year cycle, or if that's just too much process and formality and to have those multi-year rolling cycles. If you could comment on that, please.
Yeah, I think that's a very, very interesting and good question, because when we spend too much time on planning, We are only doing planning and not executing. And so if we are missing the first year budget and need to rebuild the 5-year plan because we made wrong assumptions for some reason, then maybe we should rebuild the 5-year plan or rolled over 5-year plan from the scratch again. But if we are within the the first, if we are meeting the budget, and then I think we can simply renew the assumptions and very quickly come up with a new 5-year plan from year 2 to year 6. So it depends on how we are doing in the first year as a new team.
Okay.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Nino.
No, I was going to suggest with that, we've covered a lot of ground, I guess, on the core roles of a CFO. I thought it was kind of a surprising but very insightful place to start about the role the CFO plays in aligning everybody around sort of the core competencies of the business. And we covered a fair amount of ground since then. Anything else we wanted to cover before we move on to the role that the CFO plays kind of beyond the walls of finance?
Yeah, just one thing, on that, we talked about financial planning. I always think about, financial planning and analysis or reporting, the two halves of a coin or two sides of a coin. I'm wondering, what I have found in private equity is that, the reporting side, the analysis and the reporting is something that is pretty structured and formulaic and almost handed down from the GP. And of course, I will talk about the idea of recycling CFOs so that they are, as you experience, used to the expectations of the GP. But just generally, it's certainly for a new CFO working with a GP. I've seen very often, finance leaders basically receiving a structure that they have to address in terms of the reporting. And it's very much kind of a one-way conversation. And so if you could comment on sort of the independence of the finance function in terms of the reporting side versus the GP, and how you work through those and how over time that becomes CFO and GP thinking in the same thoughts.
Well, I think in the private situations, the role and responsibility and maybe the rank of CFO is elevated compared to a public company CFO. So I think as CFO, I was first surprised at how high my expectation is from GP, because GP wants to know everything through CFO, and CFO needs to know everything. But unfortunately, CFO doesn't know everything. So CFO needs to rely upon analysis leader or reporting leader, in addition to treasurer and the controller. So the role of financial reporting and analysis is more important than private company situations to me. And he or she would be the right arm of CFO. And this division or group of people would be connected with the business lines all the time to do the budgeting, to do the planning, to do the forecasting. And they should be the source of the truth to report to the board and report to GP. So we need a very strong team, an analysis and planning team within the CFO organization.
And I've seen cases where in the beginning, very often that function you described comes from, sort of rented off from the GP. I've seen very often, associates and analysts from the GP spending time really either kind of insourcing that function or lending that function, or at least crafting that function, because it is so important to GPs. I'm sure you've seen that as well.
Yeah, no, glad we came back to that point. In fact, I think the other thing that I've seen, maybe also on this point of acceleration, or in the first few months, even if it's not seconding or having an associate or somebody from the GP kind of embedded to bring some of that best practice in, certainly having sort of templates of what great reporting looks like, and just setting expectations based on concrete examples like that, I think, and getting that process up and running within certainly the first 1 or 2 months, I think is advisable. But yeah, I think maybe why don't we make that transition? And you set the bar pretty high, Shimizu-san, at the outset when you said, the first thing that a great private equity CFO needs to do is kind of drive the alignment discussion around core competencies. And so that kind of leads well into this conversation about PE CFOs, the great ones anyway, are impacting the organization beyond just kind of accounting and financial, the financial function. But there's impact more broadly. And I certainly remember a lot of situations in Japan where the CFO was often sitting on top of not just finance but also IT. I mean, I think that exists elsewhere, but I thought in Japan it was almost universal. But if you could maybe start there, but just your thoughts on where a CFO should prioritize kind of impacting the organization across other functions to the best effect.
Okay, sure. So the key question here is, can a finance guy do more than finance? Of course, there are pros and cons, but I like this additional roles beyond finance, because companies are made of people and technology. So in order to drive the great financial results, it is good to understand people and technology, and hopefully we can influence people and technology so that people and technology would lead us to the great financial results. So IT and or HR are the natural extension of CFO functions.
And how do you partner with the IT organization, or say the HR organization, and with those business partners who are kind of dyed-in-the-wool HR or technology people? How do you find it's most effective to partner with them to kind of help them up their game and align things more closely?
Yes. So my preference is to start with an IT, because when CFO wear IT hat, CFO needs to prove the return on investment by himself. It is a great contradiction, because CFO would simply fight, with CIO, and we should invest in this and that, and they can debate forever. But if a CFO wears CIO hat, then he needs to prove everything within himself. Can he do that? I think he may be able to do that if he listens to IT members well, because IT members know how workflow is done, and every time they do, fix bugs and upgrade the systems, they have good ideas if the current workflow is good or bad. But their messages and impression and ideas are not heard by the management, of course not the board. So they have many good ideas. So when CFO comes and try to listen to them, they have so many ideas. And it's very, very interesting to listen to what kind of ideas and problems and solutions that they have. So in order to do better annual budgeting and better investment planning, I think it is a natural fit for CFO to dive into IT organization and gather a lot of good suggestions and ideas. And typically they are logical. So that would go very well with numbers and the finance theories that CFO is accustomed to.
Let me just kind of challenge this a little bit, specifically on IT. I've been an interim CIO before in PE situations, and I find that first of all, to some degree, this depends on industry. I think in like a manufacturing B2B industry, it's probably less controversial and more straightforward. The kind of technology requirements the business would have, and it does tend to fit nicely with the CFO's typical responsibilities. I'd also say that regardless of industry, there's certain technology building blocks that are essential that the CFO has their fingerprints all over. And very often I've seen many cases with PE buyout situations where there's not an adequate ERP type of technology, very often homegrown, built within the company. So developing a really world-class or appropriate ERP infrastructure, ERP system, and then maybe with that a data warehouse, a cube, analytical cube, where you have a complex business with different ERPs that have to report. I think those are two building blocks where finance really has to play a central role. But as I think about industries or situations where you've got a lot more customer touch points, consumer touch points, thousands, millions that occur over periods of time, and that technology is integral to the customer experience. For example, you start to talk about skill sets and specialties that may be beyond traditional CFO. So maybe if you could just comment on the context where this makes most, where the finance and the IT functions, are one thing, where that's most appropriate and where it's less appropriate.
Sure. So maybe the size is very important to start with. If that size is getting bigger and bigger, I think this a CFO doing an IT may be difficult to execute. I think a specialized IT executive member, CIO and CTO should be there because of the complexity and the scale of the business. But if we are talking about maybe $100 million to $500 million business, and dealing with a consumer retail with a point of sale system in place, a single brand, multi-stores, and then I think this could make more sense because financial analysis, store by store, product by product, should be handled based upon a very strong ERP system connecting stores to the headquarters in a very automated way. Then this combination of finance and IT would start to make more sense.
And you mentioned a point of sales and the commercial activities. So of course, there's many different commercial operations or business models that you see. You've got, direct sales. You've got channel sales on the B2B side. You have direct, consumer, offline, online. Of course, again, industry by industry. So have you ever seen cases where there is a role for the finance function and for the CFO in particular overseeing either technology related to the commercial function or the commercial operations themselves, or is that too far?
Maybe supply chain management and logistics management may be closer and logical area for finance people to take on, because inventory control is very, very important. Cash conversion cycle is very, very important. Of course, CFO can tell the head of logistics, hey, shorten the period. But there should be a lot of difficulties and hurdles for logistics managers to execute the shortening the cash conversion cycle. Then finance people should dive in and help together. What's the root cause may be. So again, working capital management is the key for the foundation of the business. And then I think, receivables and payables and inventory control may be the area for finance people to dive in.
Yeah, another area that just occurs to me that I've seen some arguments, for in terms of the finance function, the CFO having more of a direct say or influence over in the commercial areas. I guess what's sometimes called sales operations. Kind of that back office sales productivity monitoring, incentive systems, metrics that are consumed by commercial leaders to kind of stay on top of their sales teams, maybe especially in kind of like long sales cycle B2B type situations. And I guess the debate is always, does it make sense to move that line of direct authority somehow into finance, or at the very least have finance kind of sitting very close to and having a strong voice around how to structure those functions?
Yeah, that's a good point. CFO and HR can be another combination, but I think that your point is very interesting one. Finance and IT are both logical, and finance and incentive plan building should be very logical. That should be the core of the future growth. Whether we pay for the revenue recognition or whether we pay for the bookings is another interesting debate and policy to be able to determine. But regular HR operations require more empathy, sympathy, and emotional capital. So not all the CFOs are good at these areas, but incentive plan building and maybe headcount planning it should be logical, so finance people can take part and lead the discussion so that the 5-year plan and annual budget would be more convincing if we can identify areas and resources that we need to keep adding. So that's an extension of commercial functions that you described,
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot more potentially that we could talk about there, but I think that suffices to demonstrate that it really pays off, right? To think of the CFO as not wearing a very restrictive, specific functional finance hat, that really the great CFOs that build great value, and to your point, Carlos, are worth maybe GPs getting close to and recycling across multiple investments. It's really worth thinking about them, potentially having an impact across more of the organization, across more functional areas. I thought maybe we'd transition for the last few minutes here. Sorry, Carlos.
Before we transition, I was starting to sort of throw us back. But before, on this commercial thing, we haven't talked about marketing. Now, here I'm talking about, in particular, B2C, consumer businesses. And the world of marketing and return on investment from marketing spend is getting more and more complex. Social media is ever more important, play an important role. Direct digital marketing through email is another, and then there's so many other traditional media. And I've often found this is, there's a bit of almost like religious disbelief required, where the head of marketing, the CMO maybe, in these type of industries, sort of believes that they have the secret sauce. And I think this is an area where I've seen, marketing investment get out of control. And it is difficult to measure return on investment and optimizing amongst these different strategies. So maybe if you just comment in a consumer-intensive context on keeping the marketing function honest in terms of spend.
Right. So earlier we discussed the optimizing the cost structure and trying to lower the fixed cost and also link and relate other cost items to revenue. And marketing revenue, in my previous experiences, had a percentage of sales as a target. For example, that could be 5% of revenue budget or 6% of revenue budget. And the CMO and CFO would commit to this number. Within 6%, CMO can decide which bucket should be used for what. That should be TV commercials, that could be a newspaper ad, that could be anything else, digital, anything else. But as long as revenue is on budget, he or she can use 6% of revenue. If revenue starts to go up, CMO can spend more to accelerate the sales. If revenue starts to decline, they can't use more. They should be able to use less. So they always have this commitment to revenue and the discipline to use the money wisely and properly. And the CFO, of course, in my case, I didn't say anything to the composition of the marketing spend. Because if I start to poke my nose to the combination of the money to be spent, they don't like it. So they start to hide something from me, and that didn't work for me either. So as long as we commit to this percentage of revenue, I think both of us were very, very happy.
Yeah. So maybe it does make sense now to sort of transition to I think this final section, why don't we talk a little bit about best practice and ideas for PE funds to really get the most out of their CFOs. And so I thought we'd touch on things like, how do you find great CFOs? How do you match CFOs to specific deals? Maybe thinking about the role that CFOs play in and around boards, those types of things.
Okay. So, CFO is made of planning, treasury, and controllership, and there are less CFO candidates if we want candidates to possess 3 of them, plus PE-backed experiences. Then the pool would be very, very small. So maybe planning is important compared to treasury because LBO loans are already fixed. So the balance sheet is fixed on the right-hand side of the balance sheet. So planning analysis is probably more welcome experience. It is also important that the candidates have history to influence people and influence a business in the previous workplaces. Because if they are viewed as just a critique, doesn't work within a time horizon of a very short PE hold. I think industry is very relevant. There is little time for them to start understand the business. As long as they can lead the discussions around core competencies, they should have some previous experiences related to the specific industry or sector. So that's the kind of credentials that we probably would be looking for to start.
Let me offer up maybe from the GP perspective, almost, I don't know if this is worst practice, but something we were always very sensitive to. I mean, I want to be very blunt about this. GPs have always seen the finance function as arguably even more important than general management of the business, the CEO, in the sense that very often, you have founder CEOs or maybe second generation CEOs that are actually make a lot of sense to retain in the business from the standpoint of the GP. and continue to bet on their success. But almost invariably, I would expect that the CFO is installed by the PE fund. And in particular, if you have a CFO who maybe has been paired with a family business over a long period of time, in my experience, almost asking for trouble to continue to rely upon that CFO, and the importance that the CFO feels like they're almost working for the GP is, I think, a kind of a best practice. Is that your experience as well? You feel that strongly?
Well, I tried not to be viewed as an employee of GP while a GP sent me to the portfolio companies. So I always wanted to be a translator amongst team members, employees, the board, and GP, not only between Japanese and English, but also within the organization. I try to speak to their own language, not finance language, to better understand each other and to influence them. So this ability to translate what GP wants to the team members was a very important mission for me.
Yeah.
And also,
Please, Carlos.
well, just to finish, I thought you talked about industry experience, and I think that that's a relative, in my mind at least, and maybe you can comment. That's a relative question. I think the industry experience for the CEO should be, if they're an outsider coming in, should be pretty narrowly aligned with, i.e., the CEO needs to have experience as specifically as possible related to that industry. I think that's less true for CFOs. However, I would just look more broadly at business models and business cycles and the timing of the rhythm of how businesses grow and convert cash, et cetera. So I think that, let's say a lifelong consumer industry CFO, putting them in a manufacturing B2B environment is, probably not the best approach. So there's some dimensioning of their experience that is relevant. I find that the best CFOs have some flexibility, some fungibility working across industries within certain, envelopes of the business cycle and the rhythm. Is that your view?
Yes. So for the consumer side of the business, I think it is important to understand the seasonality and the seasonal cycle of the business. We need to invest heavily before the peak season. So CFO needs to understand that dynamics. For business, manufacturing, B2B, IT services, CFO needs to understand the pipeline generation, pipeline management, probability of wins, and resulting bookings. So the CFO needs to understand the bookings lines above revenue line, and how much we need to invest to build the pipelines of bookings. So to me, they are quite similar. Invest early to generate the peak season, or invest early to generate the bookings. So if CFO can understand the dynamics, that is a very, very interesting exercise.
So given that kind of commonality, even that goes even beyond sort of broader industry type, and given how important sort of the familiarity of a CFO, how important it is for them to be familiar with the GP and the GP expectations and so on. One of the things that we've talked about elsewhere on this podcast is this idea of having kind of a bench of talent that can be redeployed across investments. And I know, understanding a little bit about your history, Shimizu-san, that you, prior to working with EQT, you worked with another sponsor on a couple of deals. Talk a little bit about maybe the pros and cons of trying to, build for want of a better word, a farm or a bench of CFOs that you can use kind of as repeat sort of partners.
Yeah, so everyone is new to anything, so give them a chance. But I think, as Carlos mentioned, planning and analytical ability is very important to start with. So if you want to remain controllers, maybe the chance to be able to do the second or third opportunity may become smaller. So if you can maximize your ability to analyze and planning, I think your chance would become bigger in broader industries than the industry that you were raised at. So,
yeah. Excellent.
Sorry, Nino. I was going to ask Shimizu-san if you talk about not being seen as the employee. I heard spy. The spy of the GP, and well, that's a very common perception. That it's important that the CFO positions themselves sort of that independence. But sometimes there are certain very specialized needs. For example, when a new ERP system is implemented, or a new, Salesforce management or order management type of system, there is often experience that exists within the GP for that. So maybe if you could just comment on your experience borrowing expertise or tools or vendor relationships, for example, from the GP, and applying those into the company while still the CFO, retaining oversight and control, but also learning and leveraging in the process.
Sure. I think GP has a great relationship with major ERP providers and cloud providers. So often they would introduce a global pricing, which could be very competitive to local pricing. So the CFO should take advantage of the existing relationship with that global GP level, because big technology companies are raising prices anywhere they can increase. So by fighting individually with the local headquarters of big technology companies may not lead to optimizing the cost structure. There are a lot of forums that GP holds to exchange best practices amongst the portfolio companies. CFO should actively participate in these seminars and forums so that, any good ideas may have been thought about by somebody else, whether it's, right now or in the history. So borrow all the great ideas from anyone else should accelerate the time that PE holding period. So use the network of a GP and wisdom of GP as much as you can may lead to a better success for CFOs.
I think that's great advice. And I think on that note, I think we'll leave it there. I just wanted to say, Shimizu-san, it's been such an honor to have you on the show and sharing all your insights. To our audience, please do check out Shimizu-san at cforoom.org. We'll put a link in the description down below. And again, Shimizu-san, many thanks. To our audience, please like, subscribe, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you, Shimizu-san. Nice to meet
Thank
you again
Thank you,
here.
Carlos. Nice to meet you again.
Let's see you in
Thank
Japan
Nino.
soon.
Okay, thank you. Bye bye.
Cheers. Bye.